Hi everyone, and welcome to our diabetes education session. My name is Megan Jasperson, and I work for Purdue Extension in Perry and Spencer counties as the Health and Human Sciences educator. And I have my co-presenter Felicia with me. I'll let her introduce herself to you.
Hi, yes, I'm Felicia Sillings. I am a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach. I work with Everybody's Fitness, so you can find me there.
Awesome. So today we're going to be sharing some general information about diabetes with you and also giving you some tips to navigate the holidays with diabetes. And I want to just start off with a general definition. Diabetes is a chronic, long-lasting health condition that affects how your body turns food into energy. And most of the food that you eat is broken down into sugar, which is also called glucose, and then that's released into your bloodstream. When your blood sugar goes up, it signals your pancreas to release insulin, and insulin acts like a key to let the blood sugar into your body's cells for use as energy. However, if you have diabetes, your body either doesn't make enough insulin or it can't use the insulin it makes as well as it should. So let's jump in and talk about some numbers today. I'm sure most of us know somebody, at least one person who has diabetes. In the United States, 30.3 million people are diagnosed with diabetes, and that's about 1 in every 10 people nationwide. And of those 33 million US adults that do have diabetes, 1 in 4 of them don't know that they have it. So that's a pretty high number for such a serious condition. And when we look at, if we step back a little further and look at pre-diabetes, 1 in 3 adults have pre-diabetes. Now, what is that? With pre-diabetes, your blood sugar levels are going to be higher than normal, but not high enough yet to diagnose you with type 2 diabetes. So as you'll hear a lot throughout this presentation, diabetes, if it's type 2, type 1, or pre-diabetes, if you have any of these conditions, losing weight by eating healthy and being more active can really help you manage that. And actually, if you are diagnosed with pre-diabetes, that can cut your risk of getting type 2 diabetes in half. Now, talk about not knowing numbers. Unfortunately, according to the CDC, 9 out of 10 people who have pre-diabetes don't know that they have that. So let's talk about a few additional numbers. Diabetes is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States, and it's actually the #1 cause of kidney failure, lower limb amputations, and adult blindness. And you'll typically see this in adults who are diagnosed with diabetes and don't have it under good control. And in the last 20 years, the number of adults that have been diagnosed with diabetes has more than tripled. So those are some pretty alarming statistics, and I think you can just kind of see from those numbers that not only is this an issue here in Southern Indiana, but it also affects the rest of our state as well as our nation. All right, is there a cure? Not yet. However, losing weight, eating healthy food, and being active can really go a long way in managing that. And you know, if you are diagnosed and given medication, taking your medication as needed, getting diabetes self-management education, such as what you're watching right now, and additional support, as well as keeping your healthcare appointments, can also really reduce the impact of diabetes in your life. So there's 3 main types that I mentioned. I mentioned prediabetes, type 1 and type 2. There's also gestational diabetes, which is diabetes while pregnant. And type 1 diabetes is thought to be caused by an autoimmune reaction. So essentially this means the body attacks itself by mistake. And that essentially, if you get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, your body has stopped making insulin. Symptoms of this often develop fairly quickly, and it's usually diagnosed in children, teens, and young adults. And if you do have type 1 diabetes, you'll need to take insulin every day to survive. And currently, nobody knows how to prevent type 1 diabetes. This is something that is lived every day in my household. My husband is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and he got that diagnosis when he was 4 years old. So diabetes is near and dear to my heart, and I love educating folks on this. So let's take a jump down to type 2 diabetes. With type 2 diabetes, your body does not use insulin well, and it can't keep your blood sugar at normal levels. Type 2 develops over many years and is usually diagnosed in adults, but more and more often, we're seeing it pop up in children's, teens, and young adults based on a shift in our lifestyles. And if you have type 2 diabetes, you might not notice any symptoms. So it's really important to get your blood sugar tested if you are at risk. And we'll talk about some of those risk factors here shortly. And then gestational diabetes, this develops in pregnant women who have never had diabetes before. If you do have gestational diabetes, your baby could be at a higher risk for health problems. This typically goes away after your baby is born, but it does increase your risk of type 2 diabetes in life later on down the road, and your baby is more likely to have obesity as a child or teen, and also they are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes later in life as well. So there are some additional risks there. So to sum that up in a nutshell, what do you need to know about the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Type 1 means that your body doesn't make insulin at all, so they're totally insulin dependent. This can develop at any age, but typically younger, and there's no known way to prevent it. Type 2 diabetes, it means that your body does make insulin, but it doesn't process as well, and it doesn't use it properly. This can also develop at any age, and most cases can be prevented. Now, as far as numbers go in adults, only about 5% of all diagnosed cases of diabetes fall into that type 1 category, and 95% of cases will be lumped into that type 2 category. So let's talk about risk factors. You are at risk for developing prediabetes if you are overweight, you're 45 years or older, have a parent, brother, or a sister with type 2 diabetes, and are physically active less than 3 times a week. Additionally, we talked about just briefly, if you've ever had gestational diabetes, that does put you at a higher risk for developing prediabetes, or if you've given birth to a baby that's weighed more than 9 pounds. Also, this is seen in higher proportions in different populations. So risk factors also include if you're African American, or Hispanic or Latino, or American Indian, or an Alaskan Native, you are at a higher risk. And again, I'm gonna say this 100 million times during the course of this presentation, but you can prevent or reverse prediabetes with simple proven lifestyle changes, such as losing weight if you are overweight, eating healthier, and getting regular physical activity. And we'll talk about some of these things a little bit later in the presentation as well. So one thing that I also wanted to do today is share with you a risk test. And so I'm going to pull up the chat box. Actually, I can't do that when I'm sharing my screen. So I'll throw that in the comment section later and just walk you guys through this type 2 diabetes test. And this comes from the American Diabetes Association. It's their risk survey. So a few questions, and let's just walk through this, and you can tally up your points as we go. The first question asks, how old are you? If you're less than 40, give yourself 0 points. If you are 40 to 49, that's 1 point. 50 to 59 is 2 points, and 60 years or older, give yourself 3 points. And if you are a man, give yourself an additional point. If you're a woman, you don't need to give yourself any points for that. If you are a woman and you have been diagnosed with gestational diabetes, give yourself 1 point. If not, 0 points for that. Next question is, do you have a mother, father, sister, or brother with diabetes of any type? If yes, give yourself 1 point for that. Number 5, have you ever been diagnosed with high blood pressure? If the answer to that is yes, give yourself a point for that. If it's no, 0 points. Next question, are you physically active? If yes, and it's more than 3 times a week, give yourself 0 points. If no, or it's less than 3 times a week, give yourself 1 point. And then finally, take a look at this chart on the screen. This is a height versus weight ratio. So take a look and find what your weight category is. So it's divided up into 3 columns there in the center. Just find your height, slide over and find your weight. If your weight is less than what is listed in that first column, don't give yourself any points. But if you find your height and your weight and you do fit on this chart, slide down to the bottom of the column and find your point value. This could give you 1, 2, or 3 points based on your height to weight ratio. And once you've had a second to take a look at that, if you have scored 5 or higher, so take a second to add up all your total points from those questions. If you have a 5 or higher, you are at increased risk for having type 2 diabetes. However, we're not here to diagnose anybody today, but only your doctor can tell you for sure if you do have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. So make sure that if you do find yourself higher than 5 points on this risk test, that you are talking to your doctor to see if additional testing is needed. Okay, so let's jump into continuing our risk for type 1 diabetes. As we said, this is thought to be caused by an immune reaction, which means essentially the body is attacking itself by mistake. And risk factors for type 1 diabetes are not as clear as they are for prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, although family history is known to play a part in this. And so what we do know about type 1 diabetes risk factors is that they include family history. So as we've just learned in that screening, if you have a parent, brother, or sister with type 1 diabetes, you're at a higher risk for developing that yourself. We talked about age. You can get type 1 diabetes at any age, but it's more likely to develop when you're a child, teen, or young adult. So typically around that 25 years old and younger is the cutoff. And in the United States, we know that whites are more likely to develop type 1 diabetes than African Americans and Hispanic Latino Americans. Currently, nobody really knows how to prevent type 1 diabetes. They're dumping a lot of money into research, but we're just not sure how to prevent it yet. But again, this can be managed by following doctors' recommendations for a healthy lifestyle, controlling your blood sugar, getting regular checkups, and doing some diabetes self-management education. Let's jump to type 2 diabetes. Risk factors for this basically mirror those of pre-diabetes. So again, those include having pre-diabetes. If you're overweight, you're 45 or older, have a family member, a parent, brother, or sister with type 2 diabetes, or if you're physically active less than 3 times a week, or have had gestational diabetes or given birth to a baby over 9 pounds. And some of those same stipulations, if you're African American, Hispanic or Latino, American Indian, or an Alaskan Native, you're at a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And so again, this can be delayed or prevented with simple proven lifestyle changes, such as losing weight, eating healthier, and getting regular physical activity. And I know that that's easy for me to say, but maybe not so easy to do. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about managing diabetes and navigating some of the other challenges that the holidays might bring. But first I want to do a quick review and talk about what affects your blood sugar levels. So obviously we talked about diet, your food choices. If you are already diagnosed and you're on medication, taking that medication appropriately, maintaining physical activity, and then stress plays a role in this as well. And so I think it's important to keep that under control as well. Now, we talk about diet, but let's break that down a little bit further. So carbohydrates are what's really going to affect our blood sugar. So I think it's good to know what foods do contain carbohydrates. And essentially, when we take a look at this, it's fruits, it's starchy vegetables, grains, and dairies. So your fruit, all fruit is going to contain a natural sugar called fructose, but fruit also contains fiber, which can help in slowing digestion and keeping that sugar from hitting your bloodstream as fast as, say, something like candy or straight fruit juice. And as a general rule, we really try to steer folks away from drinking too much juice. Whole fruit is always going to be your better option. And this is especially true for folks with diabetes. And when we think about dried fruit as well, you need to take some additional precautions. Since the water's been removed from that fruit, the resulting dried fruit has a lot higher sugar concentrate in a smaller form, so you can easily end up eating more carbs than you realize. And we'll talk about serving sizes in a bit. Okay, when I say starchy vegetables, what are some examples of that? We're talking potatoes, squash, corn, peas, beans, lentils, anything of that nature. These vegetables are naturally higher in carbs, and for the sake of diabetic meal planning, these are treated basically as a starch rather than a vegetable. So in other words, for diabetics, potatoes essentially fall into the same category as breads. And speaking of bread, all grains are going to have carbs in them. Keep in mind that whole grains are a really good source of fiber, which, as I mentioned previously, helps slow digestion so that the carbs don't hit your bloodstream so hard. And for that reason, we definitely don't want to avoid grains. While we want you to think about buying products made from whole grains like bread or crackers, we also want you to think about how you might incorporate more whole grains into your meals, such as adding barley to soup. And let's hop down to dairy. This includes things like fluid milk, yogurt, and cottage cheeses. And cheese, we'll note, typically contains very few carbs, but it just really depends on the variety. And so as you can see, all food groups except protein contain carbohydrates. And if we consider beans as a protein source, then really all of your food groups are going to contain carbs. And this is not a bad thing. This is a good thing because carbohydrates are actually the body's favored source of energy. But when we're diabetic and our body struggles to process that carbohydrate energy properly, that's where we begin to run into problems. And so what do? Well, we need to pay a lot more close attention to what we're eating and understand what's considered one serving of carbs. So to count carbs, we have to calculate the carb grams or carb servings, which is sometimes called a carbohydrate exchange. So one carb serving or one carb exchange is considered 15 grams of carbohydrates. And the best way to know how many carbs are in a food is to read the nutrition label. You don't want to start guessing on this, but there are some general rules of what counts as a carb serving. So I want y'all to take a look at our list and the sizes that are indicated there. Rolls, oatmeal, juice, starchy vegetables, milk, pasta, and sweets. These are things that we just talked about. They all have carbs. And when I say a roll, I mean a small dinner roll, the size of one brown and serve roll. I'm not talking about like Texas Roadhouse size of your face rolls. Notice that most of the carb foods indicate that half of a cup is a carb serving. Your oatmeals, your juice, your veggies. Dairy is a little bit more at 1 cup, and pasta and rice is a little less at 1/3 of a cup. But take a look at the sweets. This is a much smaller serving. So a 2-inch square of unfrosted cake is going to be 1 carb serving. And then when you add on frosting to the cake, you've just doubled your serving. So you need to be mindful of that. And in addition to understand what counts as a serving of carbs, we should really know about how many carbs we should have per day. And I find a lot of times this is something that diabetics aren't necessarily sure of. You know, you might get a diabetes diagnosis and get some initial information, and it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. You forget about it as you continue to go on. So I always like to reiterate that the American Diabetes Association recommends a general guideline for diabetics as 45 to 60 grams of carbs per meal and around 15 to 20 per snack. Now, of course, this is not a one size fits all. This is going to vary based on your weight, your activity levels, and your medications and some of those other risk factors we talked about. But your medical provider or a dietitian should be able to tell you a target for how many carbs that you should be reaching for per day. So now I'm going to turn it over to Felicia, who's going to share some additional information with us.
Yes. So the holidays, which are coming up, the holidays can be challenging, but managing your diabetes will go a long way when you're staying happy and healthy in the rest of the year. So if you've already been managing your diabetes eating plan, then that will stay the same for the most part, but you just have to think about all the curveballs that are coming your way. You have all the cakes and the desserts and the extra food, and not everyone's thinking about their carbs and how they eat as they bring dishes to a potluck or however you do your Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatnot. So unfortunately, if we do have diabetes, the stakes are much higher if we give into those frequent temptations. So let's take a look at some holiday specific challenges, but honestly, those challenges don't only apply to diabetics, nor do they only occur during the winter holidays. So let's start by considering portions, because you can take these guidelines with you wherever you go. So by using your hand, you have, you have your palm, which is your meat, so your protein. So this could be meat, fish, chicken, turkey, whatever. And then about the size of your thumb, you can see number 2 there. 1 thumb is an ounce of meat or cheese. Then we have a fist. So if you just make a fist, should be that size. We have 1 cup or medium fruit, 4 cups, or number 4 is the cupped handful of nuts or pretzels. That doesn't mean like hold your whole hand out like this, an actual cup, like you're going to drink water, about that size. And then your thumb tip, or number 5, your table dressing, and then a teaspoon of sugar for number 6. So portions are much easier to control when you have a smaller plate. This is because the illusion created by larger dinnerware kind of tricks your brain into thinking that you're eating less. So if we look at the illustrations on the screen, our eyes naturally perceive the vertical line as being larger than the horizontal line, even though they were the exact same size. This is why we feel like we're getting more with taller glasses than short, fat ones, even though the short one might actually be larger. Likewise, in the dot illustration, the dot surrounded by the smaller dots appears larger than the dot surrounded by the larger dots. Again, even though they're exactly the same size, this is why the same portion size placed on a larger plate will appear smaller. However, seeing that vacant space on our large plate makes us feel like we don't have enough. That's kind of where your eyes perceive you when you go back for a second plate or even a third plate sometimes. So what do these illustrations have to do with our waistline? While it may seem hard to believe, the glasses, plates, bowls, serving utensils, packaging, etc. that we use can increase how much we eat by 20% or more. So you can see these illustrations come to life in this picture. We have the large plate and the small plate, but which one seems bigger? Which one do you think you would be eating more? Reality, they're all like the exact same amount. Okay. Although some of your favorite foods could be laden with extra fat, sugar, or sodium, there are some modifications you can make to a recipe to make your holiday favorites healthier. If you are the one doing the cooking, here are a few examples. So you can reduce the sugar. Use less sugar replace sugar with other sweeteners, particularly in items that will not be baked or cooked. So you don't need the extra sugar on top. Or you could change out your seasonings, make them from scratch. Even seasonings have sugar in them. Increase other seasonings like vanilla and cinnamon to give it more flavor. You can also reduce the fat. You can use less, substitute fruit, low-fat or non-fat yogurt. Just make sure that doesn't have extra sugar in it. And use more heart-healthy oils such as canola or olive oil. You can also reduce your sodium, like use less, make your own seasonings. That way they'll contain less sodium. You can use more herbs and spices in the place of salt to give it that flavor rather than just more salt. You can also increase fiber in your foods by adding fruit, vegetables, and whole grains. So the holidays bring a lot of joy, but they also turn our schedules upside down. As much as you can keep your normal routine, this includes the timing of your meals. Some medications have their dosage and timing tied to typical eating patterns or habits. For example, with lunch or dinner being your large meal a day, is that pretty normal? To get maximum benefit from your medication, we have to keep in mind our eating patterns in relation to our medication. We also need to keep all of our other self-care activities in place as much as possible, which includes, but not limited to, exercise, sleep, and checking out when you need to. So getting off that phone more often. This time of year can mean a lot more time around family, especially if you're traveling. And then make sure to set boundaries and don't neglect your personal care. Just because there's cake there doesn't mean you have to eat it, right? When we sit around the dinner table, focus on the time together, the stories, and the laughter. Make it about more than food. Think about your entire social experience. Then, when you're eating, really focus on the food. Take a bite, put the fork down, have some conversation. It'll help you eat it slower. You also savor the textures and the flavors, and this can make a huge difference. When we mindlessly eat, it's easy to lose track of counting carbs, and then you are playing a guessing game. Think about other activities your family does as a tradition, or maybe a non-food related tradition you would like to start. By thinking about them ahead of time, you can bring yourself to make a plan to stay healthy and stay on track. Okay, so how would you plan for the holiday meal? So we just talked about not arriving hungry, but we also need to be aware of those snacks or appetizers that are laid out to tempt us. Maybe you can be the one to bring a veggie tray or non-starchy choices and low-fat dip. Talk to your host about your needs and concerns, not only for your needs, but just for wanting to make the meal more healthy for the entire family. The same goes for talking with coworkers. Is there a constant bombardment of treats in the break room? See if you can make an agreement to bring more healthy treats and reduce the number that get brought in, or maybe pick a different place for them to hang out so they're more out of your sight. If you know you will not be able to resist a slice of pie, then plan for it. Adjust the other carb foods in your meal, forgo the dinner roll, and use those carbs for the pie. You can also plan for extra physical activity after the meal to help balance those carbs. Keep in mind though, if that is your plan, take a stroll around the block. Doesn't cut it. Half cup of stuffing, which is about 200 calories, can take 60 minutes of brisk walking at about 3.5 miles per hour to burn that off. Keep track not only of what you want to eat, but when you are eating. If your meal gathering is not at your normal mealtime, plan ahead on how you will keep your blood sugar levels constant. I clicked through too many. Well, that's my phone. All right, so avoid alcohol. Alcohol in and of itself can cause blood sugar levels to drop. But then, depending on what you're drinking, you could be taking in a fair number of empty calories, and calories that can affect your blood sugar and waistline. Make sure you're paying attention to your serving sizes and accounting for how much you are consuming. This is a great graphic to demonstrate serving sizes. So beer versus liquor versus wine versus a shot. Keep in mind, glasses may hold much more than one serving, like we talked about before, bigger glass or a small fat glass. But if possible, you want to stick to low sugar mixers or low carb beer options. If your blood sugar is not well controlled, you should really skip alcohol altogether, as it can be unpredictable. So staying active is important for many reasons. It helps keep our blood sugar levels in check, but it also has numerous other benefits such as weight control, lowering blood pressure and cholesterol, and it's a natural stress buster, which can help combat the negative impacts of stress on our sugar levels. If you aren't currently active, find something you enjoy doing and stick with it. That can be gardening, which is starting to get a little cold, or hiking, just walking, playing basketball, really anything that gets you up and off the couch. Get friends and family involved, or join a community gym, such as Everbody's, to help you stay on track. You can also literally just give yourself a break. The holiday season is so rushed and busy. Make sure you take time for yourself. But also, if you gave in and had an extra serving or didn't get your workout in, take it easy on yourself. It's okay. Tomorrow's a new day, or you can even start right away. But a regular routine or day-to-day lifestyle. However, when the holidays last for 2 months, we can't afford to say, it's okay, it's just the holidays. That's when it turns into 5 to 10 pounds extra of weight gain and crazy sugar fluctuations. It's all about moderation and balancing your choices.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. And one thing we did want to note is that whether you're watching this live or you're watching it later as the recorded version, your feedback is super important to us and improving the content and the quality of what we do. So we would love it if you all would complete a brief survey, and you can get to it by going to that link, which I'll throw in the chat box in a moment, or you can text that phone number and enter the survey code and get it to pop up right there on your phone. At this point, we want to thank you all for joining us and share our contact information with you. You can reach out to Felicia or myself via email. And if you have additional questions or need additional help navigating your diabetes, don't be afraid to reach out. I'm always happy to provide some additional education. And Felicia, on the flip side, do you want to share some of the services that you provide? You said you do some personal training and some other services at Everbody's.
Yes. So I am an actual personal trainer, so I can make you a plan that you can do on your own, or we can meet one-on-one. You can do 30 minutes, you can do an hour, you can do it with a friend, you can do it with multiple friends. That's up to you. And then I also do nutrition coaching. So if you need more help with, managing diabetes or just a way to eat healthier and get back on track, we can help with that as well.
Awesome. I was able to throw that risk survey in the chat box as a PDF. So if that's something that you want to look at after this webinar, make sure you click on that. I'll also throw it in the comments when we post this video, and share it with other people too. If this is something that you're concerned about, not just for yourself, but maybe some of your family members or loved ones, be sure to get them that risk factor survey and fill it out. And if you score higher than a 5, it's worth a conversation with your doctor. And then I also posted the survey link in the chat box. So at this time, if nobody has additional questions, I can wrap it up for the day and just say thanks so much for attending, and we appreciate your feedback on that, and reach out if you have any additional questions. All right.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.